So yeah, once again, we're taking a look at the paint on plastic competition, my submission, and this is the Neuspotter from Wave. The competition, you have to submit 5 photos. I ended up taking something close to like 200 photos, I think. Maybe that's an exaggeration. I took a boatload of pictures, and I had to cut it down to 5. But here we have the Neuspotter, and I'm entering this into the diorama category. And yeah, here are my pictures. This is a model that I had bought last year. The chat kind of nudged me in this direction because I was kind of thinking about doing the camel, which is a much larger model, but you know, it's kind of like, realistically speaking, it's kind of, with the time that I had left, and juggling everything else, the Neuspotter seemed like a better idea. That being said, the Neuspotter was pretty challenging to work on, everything from the building to the painting. But yeah, here's some other photos. We have Eddie, the kid Eddie, which I've converted and customized. Covered up the face almost entirely using other Maschinen Krieger parts, and scratch built some other parts using plot plate and tubes, as well as sculpting in some other details with milliput. So this is actually like the first time I've really went to town on customizing a human model rather than a robot, for example. And I thought it was really fun, so I would like to do more. Yeah, adding the tubes, the claw hand, all of that is new. And yeah, spray painting, that was like an idea that kind of came fairly early on, was the kind of concept art for that. And here we have a shot of the head with the kind of circles, the circle pattern, which was hand painted on. And this, the circle part was something that a lot of folks kind of were attracted to, kind of wondering how I did it. And yeah, we can talk about that when we get to the other photos in the slide. But yeah, that's kind of a good close-up shot. And there's the graffiti. And for those that don't know, like, the kind of concept here is that the Neuspotter is like a reconnaissance surveillance droid, and it's scouting like these ruins, and this kid is kind of like marking out the territory where the Neuspotters sort of patrol for other people to stay away from or keep in mind. And so he's kind of like hiding and doing this like without it noticing it, as it's like looking off in the other direction. So yeah, that is like the general idea. That is the project, more or less. And we can now take a look at some other photos. So give me a second here. But yeah, so this was a year ago almost, and change. I bought the Neuspotter, which you can see up there, during Otakuthon 2023. And we have the camel underneath it. That was the other model that I was considering getting, the camel. Rather, it's the other model I was thinking about building. But you can see it's much larger. It would be a much more involved build. So chat kind of nudged me in the direction of working on the Neuspotter, which I think was a good call, because it wouldn't be as taxing, but time-consuming, but it was kind of time-consuming and challenging after all. But yeah, you're supposed to take a picture of the model with in its box with all the parts, just to show that like this isn't a finished piece. You're not submitting a pre-existing completed piece. That's basically how they ensure. These Maschinen Krieger kits are tricky. They're very different compared to your typical Gunpla experience. They are not snap fit kits. They require glue practically every aspect of it, and there's mixed media. There's metal, aluminum, and brass rods, rubber tubes. In this case, I had to cut pieces of the parts as they exist. So, for example, there was like nubs, or rather there was polycap pieces with like a peg, and the instructions have you remove the peg. It sounds like nothing. It sounds like whatever. How's that a big deal? But again, coming from Gunpla, it was it was a little surprising. And here's an example of the metal parts. But that's all part of the overall Maschinen Krieger aesthetic, and I feel like the style of Maschinen Krieger is almost like you're buying a model kit, but it's actually like a kit bash kit all in a box. It's an official kit bash kit. They give you all of these parts, and there's definitely an instruction manual on how it all goes, but some of the things that they have you do, it almost feels more like you're kit bashing, which is in keeping with the spirit of Maschinen Krieger and its origins, because many of these parts are kit bashed. The original designs from Ko Yokoyama, as they appeared in the magazines back in the late 70s, early 80s, in the hobby magazines in Japan, those were originally kit bash kits, which then became official kits. And so it's kind of funny, and you can still see that to this day. Many people talk about how you can still see other model kits in these pieces, in these parts. And that's very interesting to me. Here is Eddie, that comes with the kit, Eddie himself. This is like the model stock. But I really wasn't sure if I was going to use this model, because it just felt simple to me. If you're talking about like the sculpt on the face and just the general amount of detail to it, it is a model. Again, I on the runner, it says how old it is on the runner, but it is a model that's like very old at this point. It's been obviously recast, and it's a fairly new casting of this kit and model, but it is originally fairly old, and I think it shows. I built it because I felt like, okay, we should at least build it to see how it looks, but I really wasn't committed to using it until the thought occurred to me that, like, what would be the story? What is the story for this model? Because it is in the kit, right? So like that was kind of the genesis, was like, how would this fit in the narrative, right? What is that relationship between the creepy Neuspotter model robot and this little kid with a stick? And the other thing too was I was not too enthusiastic about, like, as I said, using it given like the amount of detail or lack thereof on it. And so what would I do to change the model if I was going to use it? So here's like a really early attempt, and it's just with like blue tack, and I was like, hey, these are goggles from 1 in 20th scale pilot for the Ammo Knight. I could slap some goggles on there. We can cover up the face. Effectively, like, my big issue was how simple the face looked. But if I covered it up with a bunch of crap, then problem solved. So we kind of arrived at this point, and I took a black and white photo. That's just something I do sometimes to help me look at the model more objectively without being influenced by the different colored parts. But yeah, this is just blue tacked on the mask, the eye goggles, and the mask. And really, at that point, I felt like the story was starting to come through. It was like he has this. It almost seems like a mask for spray painting. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then I thought, okay, he could be doing like graffiti, right? And I thought he could have a robot hand. This also is from Maschinen Krieger. However, this is a Maschinen Krieger 1 in 35th scale model. I forget the name, but this comes from one of the 35 Gachanen models from Kyoto, I believe. So that was another little extra challenge, was if I was going to use other parts, I wanted it to still be Maschinen Krieger. So any other customization that I did, kit bashing that I did, it's still within Maschinen Krieger, but it possibly may have come from other companies, because that's the odd thing about Maschinen Krieger. Not odd. It's the unique thing about Maschinen Krieger compared to, say, Gundam, is that for the most part, Gundam models come from Bandai. But Maschinen Krieger has many different companies making their products. So this model here, Eddie, is a wave model, and then the mask and everything would have been Hasegawa, and then the hand claw is Kyoto. I'm just trying to think how that all worked out. And it's actually just blue tacked on. All of this is just blue tacked on to give me a general idea before we like commit and use glue, right? And so yeah, that was kind of the genesis, was like the kid really sort of informed everything else that was going to happen after, because I had this idea, like if he's this little kid with a mask on and he's spray painting, he could be spray painting like a wall, the diorama, because I was like, okay, we should do a diorama for this. You can be spray painting a wall, and then looming over on top could be the Neuspotter, kind of like unknowingly, all of this is going on unknowingly beneath its glance. So that was the kind of, so I did this sketch in July, and I kind of was doing other things, working on other projects, so I wouldn't come back to this until a little later. But sometimes, most of the time, when it comes to doing sketches and stuff, they're far more basic than this. This is still a very rough sketch, but for those that have seen my other sketches, they can be very, very basic, very, very quick. But I was so excited about this idea that I kind of worked it up a bit more. And I think that's a good indicator of how strong your idea is, how strong your theme is. If you're getting this excited about the sketch, then that's going to be enough momentum to carry you through a project that could be several weeks long, several months long. Do you know what I mean? Because the danger is you have a cool idea, it seems really neat, and you're working on it, and then midway through you kind of realize that it's not a great idea, it's actually not strong enough, and you try and push to make it happen, but it's just feeling forced and it just doesn't come naturally, and it's just an overall kind of bad experience. You want to spend the time to make that idea as strong as possible, and kind of make sure that it's exciting enough to carry you through the boring parts, the tough parts, the lows, the highs and the lows, the weeks and months that it can take to work on a project. So I say all that to say that this was something that I felt pretty strongly about, even at this stage. And it's not like it ended up looking exactly like this, but it was like, that's the genesis. The time between that sketch and starting to paint, there was a fairly big gap, like probably like a month or more. Yeah, definitely, maybe even a couple months actually. But when we started to paint, all of that felt pretty natural to me. All of that felt pretty quick. And I also felt like this was going to be a much more loose project. Like I didn't want to be very tight with my painting. I think that's a tendency that I have, is being very like overly cautious with every little brushstroke and stuff like that. And this time around I wanted to be a little more loose and kind of paint more intuitively, I guess. And so the color scheme, I knew I wanted to have something dark and gray, but kind of like leaning towards a purplish and a red. And I don't know if it's fully coming through here, but actually the color scheme for this that I ultimately settled on comes from this. Hold on, I can show you. Comes from my little paint holder, paintbrush and all of that. This is the color scheme. It was just on my desk. I was like, oh, I really like this, and I really like this. And having it blend would have been cool, but I didn't really have that in mind. But just the colors I thought was kind of neat. So that's what you're seeing there. And if you're wondering what the green tape is, those are the wires. There's some like cables that ultimately kind of get threaded throughout the head into the backpack, but I just wanted to cover it up with some tape before we kind of finally settle those in. So here we are at a point where the model is mostly put together. The eddy stuff I cut and glued on the claw, and I added the basic start of the spray can. I kind of changed some of the top part and the mask and all of that stuff. So we're kind of like underway at that point. And again, it's a black and white photo, which I think is easier to get a sense of the overall model without all the different colors, as I've been saying. And after that base coating of the Neuspotter, I started to do the pattern, right? And so this is all pre-cut circle masking tape. Like you can get a whole sheet with a bunch of circles just like this, and this also came with triangles. I ended up using the entire sheet of circles, actually, not just here but throughout the body and everything. And so it comes in all these rows, and my idea was that I would just cut out each row and then offset each circle so that we have like this alternating pattern, and then we kind of like it tapers down into like a tip, right? And then masking off all of these areas. If you look very closely, this one little area was not masked off. Again, very good to take photos because you might not notice it in person, but yeah, I went back and taped up the little gaps like that and made sure that there wasn't any empty space. Like here you can see a shadow, so obviously that's not flush to the model. And then we continued this taping all along the side, as well as the bottom and the base as well. And this is the result. And yeah, this is actually all hand painted. It's with a sponge, not a brush. I'm pretty happy with the result. We have like this kind of gradient going from a bright, kind of chalky green to like a darker bluish color. And I'm pretty happy with the results. If you look closely, of course, you can see that there's a little bleeding and stuff like that. And then also, you definitely can see, I was going to say you can't see it, but you can definitely see it. There's like little flecks of lighter gray. That happened earlier, even as far back as this phase. The whole model was actually painted with a sponge to give it a bit of texture. But then I went in and flicked with a paintbrush or toothbrush some like very light gray, which at the time I felt like that was one of those things where it's just kind of painting intuitively. I just felt like that would have been, it just felt like something that I wanted to do. Like, as you can see, those flecks are kind of big. In hindsight, maybe I wouldn't have done that, or maybe I could have pushed it more or kind of brought it down. Like, I felt like I wanted to paint much more loosely this time, much more intuitively, and just kind of a vibe painting. I don't know, is that a thing? There's the decal, the witch riding the Neuspotter, and here we are going in and adding those extra details after it's all been glued. There was still a number of gaps on the model where the arm joins the body, as well as extra details that I felt was needed to kind of blend the additional parts to the actual base model. So we kind of added on and sculpted on a bit of like extra material to the sides to extend the mask. And I'm very new to this. I'm very new to this whole like sculpting and working with figures and customizing them. I'd like to do it more because I thought this was very fun. But yeah, like again, looking at it up close, you can still very much see that it's kind of rough. I did go in and clean it up and tidy it up and sand things down once it dried, but yeah, definitely it's something I'd like to practice more. I even went and like changed, so the goggles had two eyes just like this, but I thought it would look better if we had asymmetrical look, right? So one of these eyes just like that, and then a flat kind of panel. And here's a look at how it all turned out when it was spray painted. The G, you can see that there's two G's here. Those are actually sliced off of runner. I just literally sliced off the little text off of runners and added it to the side there. And yeah, I feel like it came together pretty nicely overall. Once it's all kind of uniformly colored, kind of got a better idea of where we stand. This is like just a weird kind of composition thing that I was messing around with, and starting to paint the rest of the details yellow. The head, I thought that might be kind of interesting, just like this really bright pop of yellow. And it's like probably the brightest thing on the model, on the whole diorama, because everything is so drab and desaturated, but the yellow is like so bright. And yeah, so starting to work on the diorama, this was one of those things where like I feel like I could take a very long time to make dioramas. And I have taken a long time to make dioramas, but we needed to get this going, of course. And so all of this was done within like maybe 2 days. Getting all this done. This circular base is actually a lid from IKEA, and then we elevated the entire. We kind of raised everything with some cork, and then got to another level, like a higher base with a large wooden circular disc. This is from the dollar store, Dollarama. And so my thinking was we could have this very, how to say, we're kind of accentuating what already is this relationship, right? This relationship between the two models, this very like dark, ominous, tall droid looming over everything, and this very small, diminutive child. And we're accentuating that contrast in size by elevating the model even more, which was part of the plan. And then here we have the ruins. We've got the wall, which was built up of cork. You can't see it from this angle, but there's a bunch of cork on the underside, and the outline of the wall very helpfully Arch told me that this is called the outer cladding of the wall, and we got some ruins. We peeled away at that outer cladding. I think we could have had some of the outer part extending past the bricks, and some of it sort of receding behind the bricks. I mostly kind of had it receding, right? But the cork that the wall is made out of was actually pretty decent for sculpting, or rather carving. I felt like it was actually pretty easy to carve into this and create some pretty rough bricks. Of course, if you look very closely, it's kind of rough, right? But I felt like that was okay, given that this was supposed to be ruins. And another little thing that we looked at, because that's another thing that I'm big on, is looking at reference. I had this idea of having a ruined wall, but like in your mind, how does that look? How does a ruined wall look? Your imagination can only take you so far. And at that point, I feel like some people just stop and rely on what they imagine in their head. But I think it's useful to look at reference. At the point where your imagination can take you so far, you need to start looking at reference. And I did that live on stream. And we found some really good images that we could look back on. And one thing that we kind of took away from looking at the reference was that when you have these ruined walls, it's not actually just a matter of the wall just there and it's all busted up. There should be a lot of debris piled up by the wall. So we actually piled up a lot more than I had like initially was thinking. I even put on much more than what you're seeing here. The other thing, use reference, kids. The other thing too is that like we have, you'll see this in some other pictures hopefully, but like we have a mix of different materials. We're not simply relying on the cork, right? And we're not to give us this look of a brick wall, a wall. We're using plot plate, and you can see that there's the thin plot plate, and we have thicker plot plate to be other extra pieces of debris. We have cylinders, plot plate, they wouldn't call them plot plate, but like, polystyrene rods, and we have some very fine grit sand. And that's what I mean. We have to kind of, it's never about like a one-stop solution. Again, that's something that I think is kind of prevalent, is that there's a lot of folks that want a one-stop solution when you're creating effects, when you're painting, making dioramas, building, but it's more like the piling up of different things, different media, that creates that sense of reality. And for the viewer, if you're looking at something that is simply just made from cork, right? Then the viewer says, their brain says, oh, okay, that's a cork wall. I know what that's made out of. They did it out of cork. But when you start to like add those different things, that question falls back, and you kind of take the model as intended. You sort of look at the model as a whole rather than individually all those pieces and sort of immediately writing it off. You need to have that variety. Variety is good, as Arch was saying. And now we have, like, I started to paint, and you can see that from the last picture, I added much more stuff too, including these like longer polystyrene offcuts. These are probably offcuts from my other projects, right? And I just felt like it would look good as some additional detail, right? So that you're mixing up all of this stuff. And I'm actually pretty happy with how the wall turned out too. This idea of like painting much more loose, not feeling so tight with my painting, and kind of actually hearkening back to my school days and my like actual art painting days of like working with canvas, and that's what you're kind of seeing here on this wall. This is a lot of thin paint, a lot of layers building it up. And I like how that turned out, and I think I worked on it even more, but this is kind of like a really nice direction for the wall to give it that sense of like it's weathered and it's ruined and it's old. I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. But yeah, after that point, like I was mostly done and it was time to take pictures. We do have a photo booth. Shout out to Night Trap. He was helping me set up the photo booth. He did it all. He set up the photo booth, and he let me use his camera, because his phone camera is like way better. However, at this point, and we were talking about this earlier, looking at those final photos and kind of thinking like there's something a little off. These are good, but it's just not quite working. And also I'm noticing little mistakes and little things that need to be fixed. And it might not see it too well on some of these shots, but there's just like little boo-boos. I was like, oh gosh, this is annoying me, I gotta fix this. The other thing too, because of the composition of this diorama, it's very vertical. Again, kind of like accentuating what is already there on the model. It's a very vertical model, so I felt like we should have a kind of vertical composition. Boo-boo, yeah, some boo-boos, some little boo-boos. This model, this diorama, is kind of tall, and so it sort of awkwardly fit in the photo booth. I think I could have changed some things around to make it fit better, but that's on me. But yes, a nice close-up shot was something that was part of the plan. I had this idea that, this is supposed to be a very quick kind of mark. It wasn't going to be something more meticulously made, with a lot of different colors. They needed to make this mark and run away. And again, it's this idea that like they are marking out the areas where the Neuspotters patrol, so that other people know to avoid it. Looks great. Mike Wazowski appears, yeah. So after taking those photos, I thought, how would it look if I used natural lighting? And actually, that was kind of like the secret sauce I found was sometimes you want that like really good bright lighting that just gets everything, and it I felt like, and I've definitely used the photo booth and it's worked out perfectly, but for this I felt like it needed to be a bit more moodier, and I thought that natural light would give it much more dimension. um, and so yeah, you can see the difference here with natural light. This is just sun. And I liked how that looked a lot more. So I didn't use this picture for the final photos, but at that point I was like tired. I was like, I'm gonna take pictures, and this is what I've been saying. Like, if you're doing an online competition, you should kind of account for photography day and block out a few days for that, because just that one session might not be enough. You might need to go back and change some things, as I had to do. There was some scrapes that I didn't notice and some spots that needed a little extra work, so I went back and fixed it. And then the next day, after that little outdoor test, I took these photos, and these are actually the final photos that I submitted. So this is outside, and this backdrop is something that I painted a couple years back for this purpose, just purely for taking photos of my miniatures, Warhammer and stuff like that, and Gunpla, of course. But recently I haven't been using it too much because I've been very happy with the light box. It kind of does its job. But again, after looking at the photos, the first set of photos, and having that white background, it just seemed a little too flat to me. And I was thinking that night, like, between taking it outdoors and there should be something else. Because the white backdrop isn't going to do it, and a black backdrop would also not be good as well, because the model itself is so dark. I think that it would kind of get lost. So I was like, if only I had a gray backdrop. But I actually do have one, and it's what you're seeing here. Like I said, I hand painted this. It's just a large canvas, and I just, again, this is a couple years back, just slapped on a bunch of paint onto it and kind of blended out some areas, and other areas are a little rough, but it was perfect. It kind of worked perfectly for this, and I think it kind of captured that nice in between, and gave it the mood that I was looking for between that and the outdoor lighting. I think this really kind of captured the look. And this is sort of like the primary viewing angle. This is the other challenge. And actually here, give me a second. I want to show you guys something, because it's kind of funny, and I do this subconsciously. This is just something that happens subconsciously with my work, is that there's always some kind of relationship between what I'm doing now and what I've done in the past. So this is my Neuspotter diorama from 2 years ago. It's one of the models that I'm actually most proud of. It's one of the projects that I really felt like I used everything that I've learned and brought it all to bear on this one project. And you have a robot on the right looking at this little girl on the left, and you can see that there's this there's this connection between the two, and you have these ruins and the bricks and everything, and nature, and it's oriented, it's all posed on a square diorama base. And what you'll find is that the new thing that I made is kind of like the reverse of that. The new thing I made is a big robot on the left, with a human on the right, with ruins and bricks and all of that stuff on a circular base, but they're looking away from each other. And where one feels very kind of like, I don't know, the first one feels hopeful, maybe, in so many words, like there's something kind of like serene about it. There is, and there's kind of like a tension here because the two figures in this are not looking at each other. They're kind of looking away. And it's just weird how we have that relationship. It just kind of worked out that way. It's just subconsciously it turned out that way, that there is that connection. And that's something I kind of want to talk about in the future, is that intentionally or not, intentionally sometimes, unintentionally sometimes, I play these games in my head when it comes to composing and making models, that I make these connections and relationships between my work. And I think that that's how you make things interesting for yourself when the project can be really long and it can stretch on and it can feel like a bit of a grind. But that's also what it means to think about your work as an artist overall, which is, we're getting into artist with a capital A here, folks, so just kind of like bear with me here. But that's what it means to be an artist, and to have like an overall, like a recurring concept, is you just need to start thinking about that. And yeah, I was like, oh man, I'm kind of this is kind of a riff on this project here. It's just kind of funny how that worked out. But yeah, so we have some other photos, I think. Yeah, so now we're getting into the outdoor photos, and if you look here, that's a brick. That's a brick that's propping up this canvas because it was a windy day. This was just a couple days ago, and at one point the wind blew the canvas and it knocked over the model, and I literally was like, holy shit, and I had to quickly grab the model, and I was like so happy that nothing got broken at that point. But I was like, oh my god, I need to prop up the canvas somehow. So I just had some bricks to keep it up. But yeah, you can see all the detail there, and just some more shots. We have so going back to what I was talking about before, this idea of like piling on the detail, having a lot of things. Of course, we have a lot of bricks and stuff, but we have finer sand, and we've got these long pieces of plot plate, and even some wood. Some of this is wood, but also I also used gamer grass. We have a lot of different kinds of gamer grass, and I found some colors that I thought might be good. This is kind of like a burnt, dry looking grass, and it might be hard to see, but we have some black, yeah, we have some black tufts of grass here too. And again, it's not something that you're noticing immediately. That's something that I feel like is really important, to me at least, when it comes to making these models, making these dioramas, is that you have these big overall, the big overall impression that this makes. And that's this shot here, is like, when you look at it, what is the impression that it gives you? The long figure there, and then the smaller model, and the sloping ruins. That's the big picture. That's the overall impression. But if you're a judge, or just the viewer in general, what is the thing that, like, after you make that big first impression, what is the next thing that you zero in on? What's the next thing that you're looking at, right? And so we look at the details, and you look at things like the water slide decals. You look at things like the kind of variation in tones, and you look at the dots, right? The dots and shit like that, and the graffiti, and even down to like, now what's the third thing? What's the fourth thing, right? And you're looking, now there's things like the grass, like taking the time to put different kinds of grass, right? That's what I mean, is like, I think a lot of folks focus on the big picture, but you then need to go and what's that next thing beyond going into the finer details and those smaller little things that reward the viewer. Like the more you look at it, the more you can appreciate it. This is probably the best shot of the model of the kid overall, Eddie. I painted some stripes on the tubes. I painted a little white dot on the can. But to be honest, and this is something that was just a part of the original idea, even as a sketch, it's a little, the composition of this model is just a little tricky for taking pictures and I think looking at it as a photo, because the human figure has its back towards you. The human figure is not looking at you, right? So there's immediately like you're losing that humanity, you're losing that connection because Eddie is not facing the viewer. And I actually played around with the model having it facing us, facing the viewer, which in a sense looked more pleasing, but it also made less sense for the overall composition. So that's just something weird that I was struggling with a bit. And I think maybe in that original sketch, there was something there that was a little stronger. And then during the process of making the model and everything, things change and whatever. But I still think there's something interesting about this. It's just that there's a tension there that I think was a part of the original idea. This tension. No, is it pleasing for the viewers? Maybe that's one way to put it. Like making it look tense. God, words. And what is like just simply pleasing for the viewer? That's something that I was kind of thinking about when I was like all said and done. But that being said, this project, this competition is online based, and so it's based purely on photos. So it's up to me to kind of like choose the pictures that tells the best story, right? So yeah, this shot where it's looking directly at me, I thought it was kind of interesting because the head is glued this way. It's the way I like this shot. Yeah, the way the head is connected to the body, it felt a little fragile. If it was simply just tension, like if I was simply just having it friction, that's what I mean, a friction fit. So I ended up just gluing it, and I knew that I wanted the Neuspotter to be looking off to the side, again, sort of not directly looking at the viewer, in sort of the primary viewing angle as we've been talking about. But that being said, having it look directly at the viewer in this shot was just a really cool shot, like individually. And I'm not sure if I submitted this shot. I'll have to check, but I'm pretty happy with that. Vanilla like this shot, the composition. Suck for characters looking directly at the camera. Yeah, it's kind of funny because this model is so impersonal. There's something very unhuman about this thing, and yet when it's looking directly at you, you feel that it feels like it feels human in some ways. Looks like your paintings. Yeah, so that's something that I really want to get better at, is like kind of getting closer to blending those two, right? Like getting closer to like what I paint and what I draw and what I make as models. And I feel like every project I always get a little closer to that. And now that we're getting into like sculpting human figures or adding detail to human models, yeah, I think we're getting close to that. This is like the shot from below, like I'm really kind of angled down and looking up at the model. And that's something that was really hard to do in the photo booth too. Taking it outside like this, again, these are all outdoor shots, I was able to really kind of get and work with a lot of different angles. So I thought that was pretty neat. I will say this about this model and this project. talking about the difficulties and talking about like painting more intuitively, painting like more freely, I was like, okay, I really like the dots. I did a few dots on the head, and I did a few dots on the ball part of the model. But we need a few dots on the body, so that's what you're seeing here. I did some more work to add dots on the body, but I think I could have done it a little better. To be perfectly honest, the body part's not... You can see it here. I'm not too thrilled about how that turned out. And I was like, I could fix it. I could go back and fix it. But I was like, I'm just going to live with it. We're just going to live with it. But yeah, the markings on the head, that's all hand-painted. When you zoomed in, you can really see how hand-painted it looks. But of course, you're not always going to be zoomed in on it. And I think this is the last shot. Again, looking off to the side, and that's the project. That is the Maschinen Krieger Neuspotter Paint on Plastic painting competition 2025, hosted by Wright. It's going to be judged by Wright, as well as a couple of other really fantastic painters and builders in the world of Maschinen Krieger, as well as Ko Yokoyama himself, the creator of Maschinen Krieger. He'll be looking at all of this, and for a project that I was kind of like not even sure if it was gonna get all done, I'm kind of juggling. For here the word, thank you, Vanilla. That's very nice. For a project that I wasn't sure if it was gonna get all finished, and I was contemplating like tapping out and just not doing it. I'm happy that I finished it and I got it done. I'm happy that I got to this point, and it turned out to be something that I'm actually really proud of, and something that I'm really excited to kind of take what I've learned here and push it and do something more in a future project. Things like the masking with the circles, not necessarily circles in the future, but playing around and pushing masking and designs, playing around with composition. All of this is something that I'd like to push. Working with human models, I definitely want to kind of do that more. So yeah, this is like something that I feel like you're gonna see the evolution of like my process or whatever the heck. You see, whatever I do in the future, you might see something that connects to this, in the same way that this kind of connects to the past and the Neuspotter project, as we were talking about. You see that connection. Who knows what's going to sort of be that connection point in the future. But yeah, that's the Maschinen Krieger Neuspotter project in a nutshell. Very happy with how it turned out, and yeah, that's about it.